PharmaPal.
You're listening to Bloomscast, the official podcast of Blooms.io, home of the bioactive library for mass spectrometry instant optimization. Let's dive into the latest in natural chemistry, bioactive discovery, and the future of lab innovation.
It's definitely a subject that resonates with many people, this whole idea of using natural approaches for health, especially during big life moments like, well, having a baby.
Absolutely. And often we hear natural and we instinctively think safe, but this review kind of pushes us to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, to see what the scientific studies actually tell us, not just what we assume.
Exactly. So our goal today is really to pull out the key findings from this paper. We're going to look at the plants it discusses based on their traditional uses around childbirth. You know, things like supporting labor, the postpartum period, maybe hormonal balance.
And crucially, focusing on what the evidence shows about how they work, or sometimes doesn't show.
Right. It's about getting a clearer picture, the potential benefits, but also the potential downsides.
And this review, it's quite broad, isn't it? It looks at a whole range of plants and draws from traditional medicine practices from all over the globe.
It does. It really highlights just how embedded these plant-based remedies are in so many cultures.
Okay, so maybe let's start with just how common this is. How many people are actually using herbal medicine during pregnancy worldwide?
The review points to some pretty significant numbers here.
It does. I mean, if you look at healthcare generally, traditional medicine plays a massive role. The World Health Organization estimates somewhere between, 65 and 80% of the global population relies on it as their primary healthcare.
Wow, 65 to 80%. That's huge.
It is. And then focusing specifically on pregnancy, this review gives a more detailed breakdown for different countries.
Yeah, I saw that. It mentions Canada. The usage ranges quite a bit, like 6% to almost 50%. In the US, it's around 12%. European Union, about 19%. But then you see much higher rates elsewhere.
Right, like Russia at 69%, Poland nearly 50%, Australia close to 44%.
So it really shows this isn't just, limited to developing countries. It's pretty prevalent in many developed nations too.
Absolutely. And it's not just a Western thing either. The review cites data showing up to 73% of pregnant women in Ethiopia using traditional remedies.
73%.
And 20% in Uganda. These figures, they really paint a picture of a widespread global practice.
So what's driving this? Why this preference for herbal remedies during pregnancy? What are the main reasons people are choosing this path?
Well, the review suggests a few key things. A big one is wanting to avoid conventional medications. There are often concerns about potential risks to the fetus,
That makes sense.
And then there's that strong underlying belief we touched on that because something is natural, it must be inherently safe.
Which is the core assumption this review is questioning, really.
Exactly.
But the review also details the common reasons why these remedies are used. What kind of issues were people trying to address?
It notes a whole variety. Things like preparing for and maybe easing labor, managing nausea and vomiting, which is so common, especially early on.
Oh yeah, morning sickness?
Right. Also treating things like urinary tract infections, gastrointestinal problems, flu symptoms, general pain.
Okay.
And some women use them hoping to prevent miscarriage or to manage anxiety, even reduce swelling, edema.
Fascinating range of uses. Okay, now let's shift to what many listeners will find really crucial, the potential risks. The review categorizes a number of plants based on evidence suggesting harmful effects during pregnancy.
Yeah, this is where it gets quite serious.
Let's start with plants that have shown what's called abortifacient activity in preclinical studies. Can you break down that term for us?
Sure. Abortifacient activity basically refers to the potential to induce an abortion or terminate a pregnancy.
Okay, so obviously a major concern.
A huge concern. And the review lists a fair number of plants where initial studies, often lab-based or using animal models like rats, mice, rabbits, have indicated this potential.
It's important to stress these are early findings, right? Not necessarily proven in humans yet.
Absolutely. That's a critical point. These preclinical studies raise red flags, but they don't automatically mean the same thing happens in pregnant humans. Still, it warrants serious caution.
Can you give us a couple of specific examples from that list? Maybe mention their traditional use and what these early studies suggested.
Okay. Let's take Plumeria rubra. That's frangipani. Traditionally, say in India or Mexico, it's been used for things like asthma or as a laxative.
Okay.
But the review points to a study where an alcoholic extract showed a 100% abortion rate in rats at a specific dose.
100%. Wow.
Yeah. Another example is Indigofera trifoliate. It's used in India, Australia, Vietnam for inflammation, leprosy as an expectorant. Preclinical studies on rats showed, I think it was 92.3% abortifacient activity.
That's striking. And the list of plants with this potential, it's quite long in the review.
It is.
Names like Abris precatorius, Acaranthes aspera, aloe vera, specifically the latex.
Right, the latex part is key there.
Aristolochia indica, Areca catechu, Bambusa vulgaris, Cassia occidentalis, Cicer arietinum, it goes on, Moringa oleifera, Ricinus communis castor bean, that's a well-known one.
Yes, castor oil has a long history associated with inducing labor, sometimes controversially.
Rutagraveolens, Senellata, Stachys lavandulifolia. That's a lot of plants. Some sound quite common, with potentially serious risks flagged in these initial studies.
It really drives home the review's main point.
Yeah.
Natural doesn't automatically equal safe, especially during a sensitive time like pregnancy.
Yeah. These studies aren't definitive for humans, but they absolutely signal a need for caution and much more research.
Exactly.
Okay, moving on. The review also talks about plants associated with stimulating uterine contractions. Why is that a concern during pregnancy?
Well, stimulating uterine contractions, particularly before the baby is full term, could potentially lead to premature labor or even miscarriage.
Right. Which plants fall into this category?
The review mentions things like Allium sativum, that's garlic, but in excessive doses. Also, Chamomellum noble, chamomile again, in high doses.
Interesting. Chamomile tea is so common.
It is, but dosage seems key here. Then there's Simicifuga racemosa, black cohosh, and Hydrastis canadensis golden seal.
Black cohosh comes up a lot for women's health issues, doesn't it? It's interesting. It's flagged here for potentially stimulating contractions.
Yeah, the review notes its traditional use for painful periods and sometimes even to help induce labor late in pregnancy.
So it shows how something used for one purpose might have unwanted effects at other times.
Precisely. And golden seal, also used traditionally for various things, gets flagged for that same potential uterine stimulation.
Okay. The review then mentions plants with emmenagogue potential. What does emmenagogue mean for our listeners, and why the concern?
Emmenagogue refers to substances that can stimulate or increase menstrual flow. During pregnancy, the worry is that stimulating blood flow in the pelvic area and uterus like that could potentially lead to complications, maybe even bleeding or miscarriage.
Got it. Which plant was mentioned there?
The review specifically highlights Lavandula latifolia, which is a type of lavender, often used traditionally for various things and in cosmetics.
Lavender, okay. And then another category, plants with antiplatelet activity. That sounds like it relates to bleeding.
Exactly. Antiplatelet activity means it can interfere with the blood's ability to clot properly. Platelets are the little cells that stick together to stop bleeding.
So that could mean prolonged bleeding during delivery.
That's the concern, yes. A potentially dangerous complication during childbirth.
Which plant is highlighted for this?
Ginkgo biloba is mentioned here. It's widely known, often taken for cognitive function, memory.
Right.
But the review points to animal and lab studies suggesting it can inhibit platelet aggregation, that clumping process, raising that concern about bleeding risk.
Okay. The review also touches on something called teratogenic effects. That sounds serious. What does it mean?
Teratogenic effects refer to the potential to cause birth defects or developmental abnormalities in the fetus.
Right. Definitely serious. Which plants are flagged here?
The review lists Ruta graveolens, that's rue, and Trigonella phonum graecum, which is fenugreek.
Fenugreek. That's often recommended to breastfeeding mothers to boost milk supply, isn't it?
It is, yeah, which makes learning about potential teratogenic effects during pregnancy itself quite sobering.
It really highlights how complex this is. What did the studies suggest for these two?
For rue, Ruta graveolens, studies indicated it might interfere with early embryonic development, even the transport of the embryo to the uterus. For fenugreek, there have been associations noted with congenital malformations, both in animal studies and some human case reports.
Wow. Okay. What else? The review mentions Vitis agnus castus, or chasteberry.
Yes, chasteberry. It's often used for various gynecological issues like PMS or regulating cycles.
But there's a potential risk during pregnancy.
The concern raised is due to its potential progesteronic and estrogenic properties, hormonal effects. Lab studies suggest these could potentially disrupt the hormonal balance needed to maintain a pregnancy, possibly increasing miscarriage risk.
Hormonal effects. Okay. And one more category mentioned was potential neurobehavioral defects.
That's linked to Valeriana officinalis, or valerian root, commonly used as a sleep aid or for anxiety.
What's the connection there?
An animal study mentioned in the review suggested that using valerian during the second trimester might lead to a zinc deficiency in the fetus.
And zinc deficiency is linked to?
It could potentially increase the risk of neurobehavioral problems developing later on. Again, based on animal data, but a point of concern.
This is a lot to take in. It definitely challenges that simple natural equals safe idea pretty strongly.
It really does.
And the review brings up some broader points too, beyond just specific plants, right? Things we need to consider.
Absolutely. One really critical factor is the timing. When during pregnancy is a plant consumed?
Like the trimester matters.
Hugely. The effects can be very different in the first, second, or third trimester. Something potentially risky early on might be used differently later, or vice versa.
That makes sense. And what about the products themselves, the herbal medicine?
That's another major issue.
Yes.
Standardization and regulation, or rather, the lack thereof in many cases.
Meaning?
Unlike pharmaceutical drugs, herbal remedies often don't go through the same strict quality control. So the potency, the actual amount of active compound, can vary wildly from batch to batch, or brand to brand.
And there could be contamination.
Yes, that's a real risk too. Contamination with things like heavy metals, pesticides, or even undeclared pharmaceutical drugs. These contaminants can pose risks to both the mother and the developing baby.
So consistency and purity are big question marks.
Very much so. And adding to that is the overall lack of comprehensive, science-based studies on safety and efficacy from any traditional medicines during pregnancy.
That seems to be a running theme.
It's a key takeaway from the review. While we have centuries of traditional use, much of it hasn't been rigorously tested using modern scientific methods, especially for pregnancy safety. This data gap makes truly informed decisions really difficult.
It's interesting, though, the review does acknowledge some conflicting views, like with ginkgo biloba.
Yeah, the science isn't always black and white. For some herbs, the evidence might be mixed, incomplete, or debated, which just underscores the need for more research and careful evaluation.
Does the review mention any plants used for common pregnancy issues where there's maybe some positive evidence, even with caveats?
It does briefly touch on examples like ginger and peppermint, mentha piperita, for nausea and vomiting. There is some scientific evidence supporting their use for that.
Okay.
But importantly, even then, the review advises caution. Dosage, individual circumstances, potential interactions, they still need careful consideration. It's not a blanket green light.
Right. So pulling it all together, what's the main message we should take from this scientific review about medicinal plants and pregnancy?
I think the core message is that the common assumption that natural plant remedies are inherently safe during pregnancy just isn't consistently backed up by the scientific evidence we currently have.
Okay.
The review systematically highlights potential risks linked to quite a few plants, from inducing abortion or birth defects to stimulating contractions or affecting blood clotting.
It really forces us to think more critically, to look past that natural label.
Precisely. It underscores how vital more robust research is in this area. And for pregnant individuals and their healthcare providers, it stresses the need for evidence-based decision-making.
So until we have better data.
Until we have more comprehensive safety data, the review suggests a cautious approach is generally wise regarding the use of most medicinal plants during pregnancy.
Okay. So, to wrap up our deep dive today, while traditional knowledge clearly holds valuable insights, this scientific review paints a much more complex picture when it comes to using medicinal plants during pregnancy. Potential risks are a real factor.
That's right. That simple equation, natural, safe, it just doesn't always add up when you scrutinize the available science. It's so important for you, the listener, to be informed and approach this with, well, a degree of caution.
And that leads us to our final thought for you to mull over. Given this long history of traditional use and the undeniable growing interest in natural health approaches, what are the most critical steps needed now? How do we bridge that gap between traditional wisdom and solid evidence-based safety guidelines, especially for pregnant people?
Yeah, what's needed for better research, maybe better regulation, and ultimately, how do we empower more informed decisions in this really vital area?
Definitely something to think about.
Thanks for tuning in to Bloom's Cast, brought to you by Blooms.io. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you next time on the frontier of natural product innovation.
PharmaPal.